The story of Australia's First Peoples is the oldest continuing human story on Earth. Through countless generations of songlines, to connection with country and spirit, to resistance, struggle and survival, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander story is vast, inspiring and always evolving. This podcast series presents a collection of First Peoples voices, sharing their experiences, achievements, hopes and beliefs. These are the real stories of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australia. I'm Mayrah Sonter and you're listening to The-RealAu podcast series. In this episode, I'll be chatting to my good friend Yawuru woman, Shannan Dodson. Shannan is a very busy woman. She's on the National NAIDOC Committee. She's the Indigenous Affairs Officer for Media Diversity Australia. She's a community ambassador for RUOK Day, as well as being the proud daughter of esteemed Aboriginal leader Mick Dodson. Shannon Dodson, welcome to The-RealAu, our very first podcast series.
Thank you for having me. And I might start questioning you back. You never know.
I would expect no less from you, so keep me on my toes. But this is, as our listeners are probably used to by now, this is just us having a yarn, First Nations people talking about our experiences, what we're up to, and The Real Podcast is our contribution to our media landscape. And I don't need to tell you much about that because you're out there kind of as the warrior fighting the good fight and trying to make sure that our people are well represented and people don't talk smack or have racism in what they do. So hopefully this will be educational. No, we're absolute fans of everything that you do, and that's why you're one of the people that we've invited to come along and have a chat today.
Well, I'm looking forward to having a chat with you, but also scared because I have no idea where we're going.
You know, a good interview is always don't tell the person what you're going to talk about, so that you don't come in with your pre-recorded answers.
That's right.
So the tables have turned. But can we start by you telling us about yourself, your mob, where you're from, where you grew up?
Okay. So I'm a Yawuru woman and my family comes from Broome in Western Australia. I haven't had the privilege of living in Broome, but I was born in Katherine in the Northern Territory, and my dad was also born in Katherine. And I grew up kind of mostly in Darwin and Canberra and Sydney. So I spent probably, most of my formative years, high school and university in Canberra, but have been living in Sydney now for about 7 years.
How did it feel moving around so much as a young person?
I think it kind of became just commonplace, and I think because, my dad obviously had a job and a space that he was working in, which meant that he was getting pulled around to do a lot of different things, meant that, obviously I had, you kind of go through that time, say for instance when I was in year 6 and we were living in Sydney and we were moving to Canberra, and I was devastated because I wasn't going to get to go to high school with all my friends, and that was because Dad had just gotten a job at the National Centre of Indigenous Studies at ANU. So obviously you're kind of just moving around based on your family's career, but it was so normal. Like, I think it wasn't until I sort of realised that other families weren't really sort of doing that, or, my mum and dad sort of travelled a lot and were kind of back and forth from home, and, that wasn't sort of a very common thing for my other friends. But I think it just sort of became part of my life, and I don't think it's really, I'm not sad about it or anything. And I think as I've gotten older, I realised, the work that they were doing was so important, and, there was a very good reason as to why they were constantly off doing what they were doing. So it was sort of just like, okay, well, that makes sense.
And how has, you say now that you realise that type of work was very important, how much do you feel like that has kind of shaped who you are today and kind of the social advocacy and justice that you stand for?
I think probably a lot. It's funny because I got a email from Jack Lattimore, who's a journalist with NITV, and he was also at The Guardian, but he was writing an article about my dad, Mick Dodson, being the new Northern Territory Treaty Commissioner. And he reached out because he said, I don't really know anything about your dad, like on a personal level or, you know, from what I can read online. I kind of want to give it some kind of more personal warmth to it. So, you know, do you have anything that you'd maybe want to say about your dad or, you know, your experience, you know, what you've learnt from him? And it was interesting to sort of start actually thinking about that. And I have thought about it a lot over the years, but I think I had a conversation with my sister because she also provided a comment, and I was saying it's weird because I remember like growing up when I was younger and, you know, seeing Dad on TV or, you know, knowing that he was doing something important but having no idea really what it meant, or not really understanding like, why is my dad on TV, or, you know, why is he talking to the Prime Minister? You know, you're sort of just like, I have no idea what any of this means. And like, I remember seeing him like cry for the first time, and it was when he was doing the inquiry into stolen generations, and I didn't really understand what that was, or, you know, and I found out later in life it was because he was listening to the stories of stolen generations people for months on end, and obviously that's very impactful. And, you know, 2 of my aunties are part of the stolen generations, and I think it was just not really connecting when I was growing up. And I think also because my parents worked so hard, I always would sort of say to myself, oh, I never want to work like my parents, you know, like, oh, they're just like constantly working, like even when they're at home and they're always traveling, and I just never want to do that. Like, that's just sounds terrible. And my friends still like pay me out now being like, oh, remember when you used to say, and they're like, well, you're doing exactly like, and I think, yeah, I'm like, well, obviously that had such a big impact on me because it made me realize that, you know, it's part of your blood, like it's part of your DNA. You can't escape it. Like you know, I feel like it's my responsibility to sort of continue his work, and then also like the work of our ancestors, and, you know, to make sure that the next generations will have it even better than our generation has had. So I think it's definitely impacted me in the sense of I thought that I would escape it, but I realised very quickly that, you know, I'm so passionate about, you know, our mob, and it's also it's your responsibility. Like, you just can't let it go because it's your life, it's your family. Like, you're carrying it 24/7. It's not like you're just it's not a job, it's not a career. It's like, yeah, it's your life.
It's so funny about that. I feel exactly the same when you're telling this story, because even just a few weeks ago, I was up at what we call AMS, and we just helped to design a youth campaign that was launched up there. And my mum used to go and help set up the Aboriginal medical service up there. So I spent my childhood on weekends or time off from school going around, because my mum worked for Aboriginal Health and would be trying to negotiate good agreements with Aboriginal medical services and get doctors out there and do all those sorts of things. And I'm visiting them a lot now from a comms perspective, but it's interesting to go in and say, you know, my mum is Liz Williams, and everyone will kind of nod and go, but same, was a workaholic, and you just think, nah, not going to do that. And then here we all are, just, you know, continuing.
It creeps up on you, doesn't it? And then you realise,
I turned into my parents.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, oh my God, I am my parents.
And who else in your family has inspired you?
Oh, I think I mean, like us black fellas, we've got a big family, so there are plenty of people. But no, I think, you know, obviously my dad's really inspired me because he's never given up. Like, I think, God, like the stuff that they've had to go through on a national scale, you know, on the ground, policy, politics, everything. I'm just like, how do you keep going? It's like, I'm only 32 and I'm already like so frustrated. It's like, but you know, as we're saying, you don't stop. And I mean, I think the same for my uncle Paddy. who's now a senator. And, I'm so proud of him for taking that leap, especially, he's an old man now. He's not young, but, he saw, okay, I've been fighting outside the tent for my whole life. Let's give it a go inside the tent and see what kind of difference I can make. And, that's a pretty difficult decision to make because, our mob don't have a very good track record with the government, and our relationship is fraught. And so, a lot of the time if our mob does go into sort of, government positions or, becomes part of that world, I think people feel a bit uneasy about what that means. And so I think he's being able to kind of get over that adversity and the sort of, criticism that you get about being involved in that world. And I mean, I hope that now, he has the opportunity to actually be in power for government, so that to see what it would mean having, sort of the most Indigenous representation within our government at the moment, what that might look like. So, yeah, I think, they obviously are very straightforward inspiration. But, my sister is like such an inspiration to me because, she has like taught me so much about humility and just like being really strong in my identity and like not letting other people sort of dictate to who you are. Mm-hmm. And like we, I think have been able to sort of bond over a lot of, identity stuff and yeah, I mean, I could really go on with the list of amazing people. Like my family is so strong and we have amazingly strong women and men in our family that have all kind of made an impact in their own right. And so I feel pretty proud to have such a great family.
Yes, certainly has been an inspirational family, and thank you. If you can give everyone a hug and a kiss from all of us for all the work, because I think we need to do that all the time because it is thankless work a lot of the time. And, it's those late nights away from family and on planes and all the things, just trying to, do what we can to, as you say, make life better for the next generation.
That's right.
Would you ever go into politics?
Well, I don't know. I've thought about it just more, like I guess seeing my uncle in there, like I just think, like I wonder what kind of change you can make from that perspective. And I guess it's hard to kind of know because when you're in opposition, it's not as easy to sort of get stuff over the line. But also, like I did the Straight Talk sort of program through Oxfam, which is like Indigenous women from around the country sort of helping us to better understand how government and policy works and, what kind of impact we can have in that world. And it sort of made me realise, maybe there is other avenues for change. But then on the other hand, I'm like, oh God, like the thought of going into politics is just would be such a nightmare. Like, I mean, because there's just so much scrutiny, so you have so much responsibility. It's even more time away from family and friends, and that's your entire, like it'd be like my life right now, but on steroids. And I don't know if I could handle that.
Yeah, and we don't know much about your life right now just yet, but we did jump and get carried away with our conversation a little bit, and you didn't get a chance to tell us kind of about your studies. So you were doing a lot in your formative years in Canberra, and then moved to Sydney. So tell us a little bit about kind of your study journey and what your kind of career is all about.
So, yeah, I studied at the University of Canberra and I basically had no idea what I wanted to study, like I think most people do. And so I kind of just thought, I'll just do a Bachelor of Arts and Communications because, at least then I can do a mix of different subjects. But then, I sort of just fell into communications really. I think because, I'm a good talker and so it kind of just felt natural. But, I think I sort of just I started off like at university. I was working at the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies, and I was just working in in the archives there, which was like, I suppose that's the only sort of work I've done outside of communications. But that was so interesting because it was like working with Indigenous communities from across Australia, basically to access their own like cultural materials, like photos, video, sounds, and people were coming in and hearing, like their grandfather's voice for the first time and that kind of stuff. So that was like a really amazing experience, especially while I was at university. And then I worked there for a bit afterwards as well. But then I sort of I worked at Reconciliation Australia, and that was my first kind of comms gig. And I realised that, I'm pretty good at this and I like it. And so that's sort of where it snowballed from there. And then, I basically have just done a bunch of different sort of comms roles, dabbled in the sort of social media realm, worked on the marriage equality campaign.
I didn't know that. How was that?
That was awesome. It was I actually really enjoyed it because it was the first time I'd ever not worked in Indigenous affairs. So it was the first non-Indigenous thing that I've ever worked on. And it was just so interesting. Like, I felt like it was kind of a nice break for me in a way, like just to have that little space for a couple of months just to be like, okay, like I'm concentrating on another disenfranchised group. And I think it was sort of a nice break for me mentally because, it was kind of being able to support another group and not take it on as like a personal thing because I, don't fall into that group. And so it was kind of like I could sort of support another group and not feel like personally sort of emotionally involved. Like, obviously you care about, the attacks that they're receiving, but you don't sort of take it on in the same way as, obviously if you're working in the black space. But I mean, I found it pretty interesting that like a lot of their sort of community politics are very similar. Like just the, like the lateral violence and all the different, kind of dynamics that happen was interesting to sort of have a look at and it just sort of shows how disempowered groups often turn on each other and, and often, kind of let out a lot of their anger and trauma onto each other. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of interesting seeing that similarity. But yeah, I mean, that was a really awesome experience and a great experience working on a national campaign. And then, I sort of just did a lot of different things with different organisations, and then now I've headed into the university sector, which I've never done before, but I'm really enjoying that because it's a different realm altogether. So I'm working as the communications manager for the Pro-Vice Chancellor Indigenous Leadership and Engagement. Oh my God, it is such a
That's a title.
Blah, blah, blah. Well done. The University of Technology in Sydney. And yeah, I'm finding working in the like tertiary space interesting because it's, there is a huge, profound impact that you can make in that space for our mob. And it's been interesting to kind of see, long term what impact that could have.
I'm interested to know a little bit more about the Australia's first Indigenous residential college that UTS has announced that will be coming up. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Have you been working on that closely? Or?
Well, I mean, that was basically what I was brought on for. So Michael McDaniel, who's the Pro-Vice Chancellor Indigenous, he sort of brought me on as his communications manager to kind of work on that project as my major project. And I was kind of just like, wow, this is an amazing idea, so innovative, and I'm definitely down to work on this. So basically what it is UTS is going to build, it's, as far as we can see, it's also like the world's first Indigenous residential college. And by that we mean, so, you have your traditional colleges at universities. We've got them here in Sydney. But so many of them are sort of based on, you know, either British traditions or, you know, maybe religious traditions and there isn't really anything that encapsulates Indigenous peoples and our traditions and our cultures and perspectives. And so we really wanted to build a college that would kind of encompass us, and it would be sort of, rather than us always sort of being on the periphery, it'd be like we're the hosts rather than the guests. And so I'm talking like from the design of the building. So we're going through that process at the moment. You know, the criteria will be to have Indigenous designers and architects involved in what the building looks like, what the spaces might look like. You know, we want to have, we've basically got a huge wish list that the university's just like, okay,
calm down.
Sure. But you know, what's really deadly about it is that the university is like really supportive and was just 100%, yeah, let's do this. This sounds like, you know, something that we can do as sort of a blueprint for other universities to hopefully do in the future as well. And so, you know, it's going to be a space that is sort of designed and thought about by Indigenous people. We want it to have community areas so that, you know, we can also hold, you know, galleries, showings, and having theatre and dance performance, and we want to have like a family history area and a library, and you know, just having sort of this space that really sort of is all about us. And it would be for majority Indigenous students, but also for non-Indigenous students, because we kind of want to create, you know, sort of generations of Indigenous and non-Indigenous people that have a really deep understanding of Indigenous peoples and the contributions that we make. And so it's going to be, we want it to be a pipeline sort of initiative where it's starting from high school, you have your time at university, but then we're creating a lifelong community after university and that pipeline into employment. And so I think it's going to be pretty awesome.
It certainly sounds very awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, we haven't really done anything like this before. I feel like we really wanted to, you know, get away from this deficit sort of approach that we often use, and it's more of a strengths-based approach in terms of what Indigenous people have to give and what we have to contribute to Australia and the nation. And so it's a nation-building project, basically.
And another thing that we love about you is your championing of Indigenous rights in the media and media diversity more broadly. I don't think there's anyone out there quite doing it as much as you are.
Thanks.
No, you're prolific about it. You write lots of articles when things come up. You're quick to turn them around when there's racism in the media, which happens way too often. And the media reflects our country and talks to a lot of people. So you really have to stop and pull up the media when they're negatively framing Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And you do that really well. What makes you want to do that and lend your kind of communications expertise to that argument?
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of pick my battles sometimes, because you honestly could probably write an article every single day if you wanted to. But I think, I don't know, I felt like, I mean, I obviously do have a communications training and media background, and I'm not a journalist. So I think in that aspect, I probably bring a different perspective as well. But I think, you know, I had a few people tell me, and also sort of non-Indigenous people tell me that, you know, the way that I explain things or kind of communicate them, it's sort of, it resonates and it makes sense to them, sort of thing. So I thought, okay, well, if I can try and write things that can resonate with people or help people to understand issues that they really can't get their head around or that they feel kind of excluded from, Like, that's really what I want to try and do, because I mean, all of these things are so emotionally charged, and it's so easy to just go on the defense, or to, be very aggressive, be very confrontational. And I totally understand why people have that approach and why they would potentially kind of put that out there. And, of course, there are moments when I want to just scream and just swear a million times and that kind of thing. But I guess for me personally, I'm sort of like, well, if we want any kind of long-term change, like, you got to meet people in the middle, and you've got to try and have a conversation with someone and understand that you're probably both going to get defensive. There's going to be a breakdown of communication, but if you can just try and get that across in the most sort of succinct and very measured, very, just factual way, that's probably going to sink in more with people. I think I just try and, I just want to try and be a measured voice that helps with, just getting people to understand these issues better and to feel included in the conversation, which is important as well.
And I bet you get some negative responses to that, and that's got to be hard online when you put something out and people attacking you back. How do you handle that?
Oh, yeah, that's the story of our lives, isn't it? But the funny thing is, I've always said, to be honest, you see the Andrew Bolts, and now you've got Mark Latham and Pauline Hanson saying we've got to do a DNA test, which I don't even know how that would work. But, that kind of stuff actually doesn't really hurt me as much. Obviously it's hurtful because it's just, but I think some of it, I've heard it that many times, it's so outrageous, it's just like, whatever. And, you get the racists, you get the people that, you get Joe Hildebrand, that made me wild, but you get your Joe Hildebrand who's writing articles about how, basically Aboriginal people should just calm down because everyone's been colonised, and that, the stolen generations was, the intention was to do good. So, and it's just like, oh my God, okay. But so I think that kind of stuff, I sort of expect that. It's like you've heard it a million times, and so I don't think that hurts my heart as much. But I think the stuff that really hurts me, which I think I'm getting more resilience to because I understand where it comes from, but is, that lateral violence that, other black fellas basically running you down for what you're doing, saying you're a sellout, saying you're, this, you're that, you're just conforming to the colonisers and, all that sort of stuff. And I think, that used to really, I would cry about it. It's hurtful because, not only are you having your own identity struggles as an Aboriginal person, particularly, I've got an Indigenous father and non-Indigenous mother, and, I've always grown up black because that's just who I am. But you constantly, your whole life, have people telling you, you're not black, or you're not Aboriginal, you don't look Aboriginal, or how much are you, and, that kind of stuff. So you're having that internal struggle constantly anyway, because the world is constantly telling you you aren't who you are. And then on top of that, you then have other Aboriginal people saying to you, you aren't who you are, or you are, this version of yourself which isn't true, but they're kind of projecting that onto you. And so I think that stuff really has hurt me the most. And I think I've just had to learn that I've just had to kind of build resilience to that, because and it's also understanding where that's coming from. And I know that all the people that do that kind of behaviour, the very, it's lateral violence is what it is. It's because they are having their own hurt, they have their own anger, and they're projecting that onto you. And you know what? Sometimes they're projecting their own identity struggles onto you. And so you kind of just have to sit back and go, okay, why would this person be saying that? And try and just unpack, this is coming from a group of people who have been so disempowered, so, vilified and discriminated against, that is just such a common thing that happens, that we end up just letting out all that hurt on each other because we just don't know where to put it. And so, yeah, I think once you start to try and unpack that, but it's still hurtful. Like it's...
Well, it's an important conversation that you're even just bringing it up and knowing that it hurts, and people can listen to this and go, yep, I know what that feels like. And maybe I've had that reaction and maybe I need to think about that before I do it. And then on the flip side, making sure that you take care of yourself and surround yourself with people who uplift you and, do things to take care of your mental health, and try not to let the trauma that our people have suffered over so many years kind of continue.
Yeah, exactly.
You need to make that decision to enter that new kind of space.
Yeah, and I feel like, all of our families are suffering from intergenerational trauma. Like we're all... that's been passed down to every single one of our families. And so, we've kind of started having these conversations a bit more as a family, our extended family talk. Also you have to think, traumatized people don't talk about their trauma. And so, even just addressing the fact that there is trauma there, even if it's a positive sign, even if it's not going into it, but just saying, us as a family, we have intense trauma that has been passed down to us for generations. And so how can we prevent that from getting passed on to our children? Because it's not a way to live. It's not, we can't continue to project our trauma onto our children and our grandchildren. And it's not easy to do that, It's really hard to shift your mind when that it's embedded into your DNA. It is actually embedded into our DNA. And so I think, if we can at least be mindful of it and try and think of what are the things that I can do to shift that so that I'm not passing that on to my kids.
And what are some of those things?
I think, as I said, like even just acknowledging the fact that there is trauma there, which is, even with our extended family, we've started to kind of, acknowledge, hey, like there is some pretty horrible trauma here that has been passed through us, and we don't really know how to deal with it. We don't have the answers, but we need to acknowledge that it's deeply affected us as people, as a family, as individuals, and how can we at least be cognizant of that? And I think also it is about having those scary conversations, and I can't say that I have those conversations with a lot of people. I'm not saying it's easy, but I have, as I've gotten older, tried and address some of, that impact. And, I hope that maybe that will make a difference. And I guess the more you talk about it, the easier it becomes. And I am starting to see that within our family. So I guess you just got to keep trying, even though it's so uncomfortable.
And it's worth the effort, isn't it? Those uncomfortable things, you just got to keep pushing through until it gets just a little bit easier.
Exactly.
It's kind of like giving up chocolate. You just got to keep kind of pushing through.
No, I'm not giving up chocolate ever. I've tried and it is horrible.
We're going to cut that bit out. So on the flip side of that, you also get to celebrate the best of our people by being on the NAIDOC Advisory Committee. New to the committee, but how is that? How do you enjoy being on the committee, and how is it each year getting to kind of help build the Night of Nights?
Oh, it's such a nice balance because, as we're here talking about like all the, articles that I write and, all the different things that you are kind of having to constantly face. But the NAIDOC committee is I'm loving it. I mean, I've always wanted to be on the committee, and I just had, it was like putting aside the time to actually apply and all that sort of stuff. So I was really stoked to get on there because, NAIDOC is such a big, it's just a big institution for our mob. Everyone knows NAIDOC, everyone, and it's something that sort of connects us all, no matter where we are around Australia. You mention NAIDOC to another black fella, you just immediately know, where each other's coming from. So I think I love it because it is so positive. It's just, we did so I was involved in the first NAIDOC Awards last year, and that was all about women. And there's just nothing, it's not focusing on, what's wrong with us and, all the issues that we face. It's just, let's just talk about, how bloody amazing we are and the amazing things that we've done and the people in our communities. And that's when you just feel that really, that sense of community and how we're all connected. And I kind of feel sorry for other Australians because they just don't have that though. They don't have that connection that we do. And yes, we're connected by, the unique oppression that we've had to live through, but it's also because, we do have this kind of unspoken bond with each other that you can't really put into words. But yeah, that's what I love about NAIDOC, because it just really brings that all together, and you just feel, I think it really makes you feel even more proud as a black fella that week and, in the lead up to that. And it just, it's a good feeling. It makes you feel really strong in kind of who you are. And I'm loving it because it's a positive.
And it's important to have that balance and design our lives that way, isn't it?
That's right.
I'm keen to know if there's anyone in the world that you would love to meet.
Ooh. I mean, there are really trashy celebrities that I could say, but that's not very profound.
But look, I would love to hear who they are because I would have some to contribute to that conversation as well. Go on, you tell me.
Oh dear. I mean,
Come on, there was one or two. Who are you stopping? Is it a Kardashian?
Yes.
Which one?
Well, I actually have met Kris Jenner and Kendall Jenner, but they don't count really as Kardashians. So, but I was pretty stoked to meet Kris Jenner. But
where was that? Tell us about that story.
At a random event, and actually it was at this event that I went to at the Star Casino, and it was this Australian photographer who's kind of been working with Aboriginal communities but then he sort of is working with Black Eyed Peas, and it's really random. But so he had this kind of photography thing that he was launching, and Kendall Jenner was sort of part of it, and so she was escorting her. And anyway, we met her, and my friend met her, and we were like, let's just introduce ourselves, have a chat. And so we were just like, hey, how's your night? So you're gonna hit the slots later? And she was like, hit the sluts? What do you mean? And we're like, the pokies.
Didn't know what that meant either.
Yeah, she's like, sure, yep. But yeah, so that's my one claim to fame with the Kardashians. But I'd love to meet Kim or something, which is so terrible that I've been sucked into the pop culture.
And why Kim?
I don't know, because she is probably one of the most famous people in the world, and it's just crazy how famous that family is. I think from a comms media perspective, I'm just going to lie and pretend that's what it is, but that it's just how did this family get that famous? Anyway, so it's more just a kind of, David Attenborough type, just wanting to...
It's a bit fascinated
by
totally. Celebrity.
But in terms of, I guess if I'm trying to be a bit more intellectual, I would love to meet the Obamas.
Totally.
I think probably so many people would say that. But honestly, imagine just sitting down and having a yarn with them. it would be amazing.
What would you ask?
It would be interesting, I think, talking to them about their experience with the African American community and whether, any of the backlash that maybe they had received and personally how they dealt with that and what that felt like, because I'm sure, they would have had lateral violence stuff going on too. So, I mean, even just that stuff I would find interesting. But yeah, I mean, like, that's pretty self-explanatory, isn't it? Like, imagine that.
Yeah.
I'd love it.
Would you say, who's your mob?
Yeah. Who's your mob?
Surely we're related somewhere. We can claim them at some point.
Somewhere down the line.
Yep. And so what's next for you other than trying to meet Kim Kardashian? Kind of what's the goal? What's the dream job? Sounds like you're in an amazing job at the moment. You want to kind of see that through and come to life. But what other kind of dreams do you have that you're looking forward to chasing?
Oh, I don't know, Mayrah. I have like dreams every day. But I think, I am really enjoying working in the education sector because it's something different and I see the impact that it makes. And, I didn't realise that, once an Indigenous person goes to university, that really closes the gaps in all other areas of life. And that has a sort of ripple effect on their family and communities. It makes sense, but I just never really kind of put two and two together about what impact that would make. And so, I think that's something that I want to be sort of helping to, not saying that every black person should get a degree, but it obviously helps in a lot of different areas. So, if there are Indigenous people who are wanting to go to university, it is doable, and although it's daunting, it's something that also can be a really rewarding experience and can help not only you as an individual, but also your family and your community. So I think I probably will stay at UTS for a while because UTS represent.
Totally.
But also, dreams. I guess I do enjoy writing about issues that I'm passionate about or, doing podcasts with, people that I love like you.
Love you.
So just being able to, I think I do want to try and use my skills to, like I said, be able to help people to understand our communities and our issues better. So that we can just have a better dialogue publicly. And so I'm interested in sort of continuing that. I think that will be really important, I hope, for the future. And, I don't know, I have like, do you ever really know what you want to be when you grow up? I feel like I have a career crisis every day because I'm just like, I love communications, but, could I potentially grow in different areas? I don't know. I feel like there's so many opportunities in the future and I don't really know what that might look like, but I kind of want to just keep building on what I'm enjoying at the moment and hopefully, that will just open different opportunities. And I just want to travel more. It's nice to have an escape sometimes because, you're black 24/7 and it's very hard to sort of turn that off. And not that traveling you really get to turn it off, but at least you're not in Australia and it's nice to kind of just have that respite sometimes.
Totally can relate to that.
Yeah.
So very good dreams and goals there. Any last bits of advice for people listening to The Real about what they can do to help our race relations or how they interact with our mob so that we can, have a better path as a country?
I think it sounds so cliche, but it's just like listening and, listening to this podcast and, but hearing from black fellas just telling their stories and having a yarn and, it's just listening to those stories. And I think I really am grateful that, we have seen, I've seen even in the last 5 years, like Indigenous X, and you're seeing more like black journos, and we've got NITV, and, I feel like we're making our, sort of ourselves known.
And our voices heard.
Yeah, totally. Like I do think that it's changed a lot in obviously it can always be better, but I feel like we are really just, staking a claim to the space and just totally having our voices heard in a way that just hasn't really happened before. And we're being able to do it the way that we want to do it and not within parameters of, other people. So I think that I'm glad that we are seeing that, and I think it's only going to kind of get more and more. But I feel like, just listening to our voices coming straight from our mouths, our writing, is such an important way to actually understand where we're coming from. And I mean, there's so many things that people can do. I mean, I literally just wrote an article for Triple J the other day about like the 10 ways that non-Indigenous people can engage with Indigenous people in a positive and like constructive way. But I'm positive. I feel like we're moving in a much more positive direction at the moment, not only as Indigenous people, but with non-Indigenous people too. And at the end of the day, like, we're 3% and that 97% of the population, like, we have to bring them along in the conversation too. And I know that, there's a lot of hurt and a lot of pain, and, sometimes we don't want to have to be inclusive all the time, because sometimes we just need our own space to not be doing the heavy lifting constantly. And that's my thing, I guess, particularly for non-Indigenous people, just to like help with that heavy lifting. And by that I mean, of course, I think it's, for me personally, like I would prefer non-Indigenous people to ask questions, to seek advice and to be engaged in the conversations, but then not just rely on Indigenous people to get those answers as well. Like there's so many avenues that you can kind of do your own research and find out your own information. And there are things that you can help with rather than Indigenous people helping you to kind of, have your own sort of cultural awareness or whatever. So, I mean, that sounds very complicated because it's basically just like ask, but also don't ask.
No. I think you've explained it well.
Yeah, it's just more being mindful that there are things that people can do that don't require having to emotionally exhaust Indigenous people all the time. And I guess just for Indigenous people as well, like just keep slaying. Like we are just, I mean, look at how like resilient we are, seriously. Like the shit that we, am I allowed to swear? Sorry.
That may have been the very first swear word on the podcast. Well done.
But I mean, you have to swear when we're talking about this stuff because
the power of words, you need to use them when you want to make a point.
The stuff that we have gone through and that we are still here, we're still proud, we're still going. I think that, I think it's just, we just got to keep having our voices heard and supporting each other. Like that is my number one thing. Like all of us blackfellas, we're in this together, and yes, we can have our issues and that's fine, and we have very different opinions and we're not coming from the same perspectives. We all have such different perspectives, and particularly when it comes to change, we've all got different views on how change happens. But we've got to stop dragging each other down and just support each other because, we're all fighting our own struggles, and we're fighting a struggle as a community, and we're so much stronger together. And so I just hope that moving forward, we can all just lift each other up and, just be the best versions of ourselves. And what else can you say, really?
I can't say anything more than that. I think you said it perfectly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayrah.
For joining us on The Real. Shannon Dodson, legend as always, sharing so much insight there with us. Thank you, and hope you listen to The Real podcast again soon. You've been listening to The Real podcast series. The Real is an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander digital media platform produced by 33 Creative. This episode was recorded in Sydney on Gadigal country. Produced by Jake Keane and Marguerite Barbara. Music production by Jimbler. For more stories and podcasts, visit the-real.com.au/podcast.